it up for God for the amazing 2018. Everything that happened. Super excited. Just 96 baptisms. You think about the lives that were changed with those baptisms last year, just people who were really dedicating their lives to Jesus. Three big things that you just saw in the video that I'm very excited about. And, you know, you think about all that it takes to accomplish a goal when we feel like God's telling us, hey, as a church, we want you to do these things. And so, you know, it's a prayerful journey. It's a faith-filled journey. But you think about the Hope Center. We launched that in January. 110,000 meals were served to people that were, you know, food challenged. I don't know how else to put it. And just how God used you guys and used all of us to make that happen. We launched our Hillcrest campus in September. And then the house build, we sent in one weekend 170 new breakers to go build houses in Mexico. That's the largest group we've ever sent all in a weekend. And so just very excited about what God is doing in and through us. And as I think about different goals that we have, and as we think about how God moves in our lives, one of the things that always strikes me is it's always a faith journey for us, and it is for you too. When you think about what God's calling you to do in your life, and you think about the goals that he's, you know, placing in your heart and wanting to birth in you, it takes faith to make that happen. But it also takes a lot of, grit. It takes vim and vigor. Don't you love that phrase? Some of you have never heard that phrase, vim and vigor. How many have never heard that phrase? All right. How many have heard it? So the rest of y'all? It's an old word. It's an old phrase, yeah? And what it means is vim and vigor is like vitality, energy, strength, grit. So there's a faith piece, but there's this other piece in our lives that when it comes to fulfilling what God has called us to do, what God has called you to do in your home, at your work, all that he's calling you to, your own personal transformation, that it takes this vim and vigor in our lives. Now, there's a famous Christian thinker. His name is Dallas Willard. This is a book of his that he wrote called Renovation of the Heart. He's written many books. He has gone on to be with the Lord. He's no longer with us, but just an amazing Christian thinker and theologian. And his books are very transformative. And what I like about him is he took this phrase, vim and vigor, and in his book, Renovation of the Heart, what he does is he's talking about how that's what it takes, and he makes it into an acronym, the word VIM, V-I-M, into an acronym. And he talks about how these components are what it takes for you and I to have personal transformation. What it takes for you and I to actually have spiritual transformation in our lives. To where God takes us from this idea of just surviving mediocrity life to actually thriving, to reaching the goals, reaching the things that you feel God is calling you to, calling your tribe to, your family, or whatever that looks like for you. That it takes VIM to do that. And so I wanted to explain what he meant in Dallas's acronym. VIM is the idea of having vision, intention, and means. Vision, intention, and means. There's a card somewhere next to you on your chair, and it'll kind of walk you through what vision, intention means. And I'm going to talk about it this morning. You can take notes either on the other card or on this. But how it is that we have vision for our lives. And vision is what inspires you and I. Having something that's ahead of us that inspires us to reach out towards that. Vision will help you and I when the means, that is the day-to-day routine, when it gets boring or hard or difficult. Having a vision helps us get beyond those obstacles. Having intention, what it is that you and I are committed to in our hearts. Like what it is we have chosen to do and are committed to. And then the means is the strategy by which we have the actions that's needed for you and I to move forward, to progress. The actions to accomplish our goals in life. And then to have vigor, which is the passion and vitality in our lives to make that happen. And so part of this really goes along with what we had talked about last week, and it's the anchor verse, by the way, to this series, which is in John 10:10, where Jesus said that the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy everything. Like the enemy that we have is a real enemy, and his job is to help you and I live in a mediocre life. His job is to help us just keep in this area of surviving, but ultimately try to get us to be dying inside. When Jesus said, no, I want to take you from that. And he said they may have life. And he doesn't stop there. That's surviving. but I want to move you to this abundant life, to a life to the full, thriving. That is God's heart for you as you sit here today. As you think about 2019 and all that, the hopes and dreams and passions you may have, or maybe you're sitting here and you're like, I don't have any right now. God wants to move us from those places to really coming to a place in life where we have our best life this year. So how do we do that? How do we have our best life this year? I think the first thing is that we have to create a vision for a better future. And this is about where you're going, where I'm going, where New Break as a church is going. Where is it that we're going? God has given all of us a measure to create, to innovate, to dream. And he also places within us this desire for our lives. And whatever stage you find yourself, maybe you're a student in junior high or high school, maybe you're on the cusp of retiring or in between, wherever you're at, that vision can be different for you. And the dreams sometimes morph and change throughout our lives. But it's having that vision ahead of us. Now, God does this in our passage that we're going to look at in the book of Deuteronomy. And if you have a Bible or a device with you, you can turn with me to Deuteronomy chapter 8. In this passage, it finds itself in what's called the first five books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. It's the fifth book in the Pentateuch, the Torah. And this is, what's important about this book is this is Moses's, and you remember the story, right? God called Moses to deliver the Israelites from being in bondage and slavery into Egypt. He told them to go and tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And so through all the plagues, they released him, and then they do go into the wilderness, and then there's this wandering for 40 years, and, they kind of didn't get it right for 40 years. Last week I talked about how that's sometimes us. And this book is now where they're on the cusp of entering into the promised land. They're east of the Jordan and getting ready to look across that river and cross it and enter into the Holy Land that God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob hundreds of years prior. So they're here, and this book that Moses is writing is kind of his final encouragement to them, his final book of warnings, commands from God, vision, correction, all of this. And so Moses is communicating something very important here in this book. And he says this. He says, for the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land. Again, the promised land. He's bringing you into this good land. A land with brooks, streams, and deep springs gushing out into the valleys and hills. At first glance, you're like, okay, cool. It sounds like Oregon. No. You got to remember, where have they been for 40 years? A wilderness wasteland where there's no water. God had to do miracles where Moses hit the rock, and out of this solid rock, water came gushing out because there was no water anywhere. So God had provided for them for 40 years. And now he's saying, hey, look, you're going to go into this land. It's going to be awesome. Plenty of water, streams gushing out, springs, valleys and hills. No longer this, level wasteland. And then he goes on and says, look, this is a land with wheat and barley, vines. What comes from vines? Fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil, honey, a land where bread will not be scarce and you will lack nothing. He's saying, now you're going to have this smorgasbord of food. What have they been eating for 40 years, if you remember the story? Manna. It's like a bland coriander seed that every night it would land on the ground like dew, and they would scoop it up in the morning, and they would make cakes out of it and eat it. They'd make banana bread out of it, and they would eat it. Really? Not even a courtesy laugh? Okay. And they would eat it. But think about if you had to eat manna every day for a week, 2 weeks, a year, 40 years. Now he's like, you got the charcuterie board of the century. We are going to give you everything. This land has got it all. And he goes on, he says, and a land where the rocks are iron and you can dig copper out of the hills. In other words, you can forge tools from the minerals that are there. You can make weapons, all this stuff. God's saying, you're going into this place where the gross domestic product is going to be amazing. It has everything you need. This is what my heart is for you, Israelites. I want to give you this abundance. And Moses is reminding them of the promise that God had made. And he's reshaping this vision of where he's taking them. And it's so important for you and I, when we look at this, and you think about your life, and you think about the promises God has for you, that we allow those promises of God to fuel our optimism. Letting God's promises fuel our optimism in life. It's not just self-help where hey, I'm going to think positive about my life, though that's important. But it's really the idea of God's promises and how he wants those to fuel a life that's optimistic. I've always said this, Christians need to be the most optimistic people in the planet. When you sit here today, do you tend to look at life glass half full or half empty? How do you tend to see life right now? Do you see it negatively or optimistically? Do you tend to see it, the glass is kind of half full or half empty? Or maybe you're a realist and you drank both glasses. How do you see life? For me, I tend to be very optimistic. Part of that is a little bit of that is just my wiring. I tend to look at things very optimistically. I tend to look at people who struggle with things over years and go, you know what, there's hope. You can keep going. That's an important kind of, personality to be as a pastor. You're never going to change. No. So I tend to look at things very optimistically in my own life. And part of that why I look at things optimistically is also not only wiring, but it's a discipline that I've had to develop over the years. It's a discipline that I've had to develop in my life because of my life circumstances and decisions that I've made in the past. I had to choose many times to be optimistic. Some of you know my story and know it a little bit deeper. Back in 1986, I went into a 1-year live-in residential Christian program for drug addiction. I was hooked on crystal methamphetamine, coke. It was a daily part of my life. And I got to a point where I was absolutely helpless and hopeless and realized that I needed to change. Something needed to happen or I was going to die or end up in jail. And I remember crying out to God, and so this opportunity opened up for me to go into the ministry of what's called Teen Challenge, and you guys have seen them. We've had them here before, some of the guys that are in the program currently, and so it's amazing ministry. And so I went in for an entire year. I graduated, and then I stayed another 6 months and did an internship. Then I went to their ministry institute to kind of go into the ministry to learn some more things about the Bible, and did that for 2 years. Ultimately went on staff as a teacher and ultimately became the director of Teen Challenge Orange County, California. So 10 years went by being in the ministry. And then through a series of events and things that had happened, I actually relapsed after 10 years. And I remember the feelings that I had of just, again, hopelessness. Like, really? So I decided to go back into the program. And that was a little awkward, going back in as a student, because I'm seeing people that knew me as a director, and they're like, oh, you're back as a student? Huh, that's awesome. They're like, why are you here? And so I did that for about 6 months as kind of a refresher and trying to get my life back with God. And I got out of the program, and within about 4 months, I relapsed again. So I'm like, so I only do what I knew to do at that time. I went back in again as a student. This time, they're like, nah, you can't stay in California. You're ruining our stats. You're making us look bad. We need to send you to Portland and then to South Dakota, kind of Egypt, right? Sorry if you're from South Dakota. Send you there. And so I was like, all right, whatever. So for an entire year, I'm back in the program again as a student. So, this is coming up to 3.5 years as a student in a program. And you think for a minute, imagine for a minute how you would feel back in that third time. I'll be honest with you. I wasn't optimistic. The negativity that was coming against me, I felt like, I'll just be honest with you. I felt like there's something wrong with me. That there was something broken that could never be fixed. That somehow I knew God was true, his promises were true, but there was something that just, what is wrong with me? Like, do I have a mental deficiency? Is there something going on? Like, what is it that I can't get this right? And hopelessness begins to set in. I want to tell you that addiction is the master of hopelessness. The nagging question for me was, am I ever going to get past my past? I know the program worked for other people, sometimes for me for a little while. God worked, ish. But am I ever going to get past this? And what had to happen for me was I had to get to a place in that third time in with God to where I needed to really think about the truths of God and make a decision in that moment. Is God real? Can he help me? And he did. Didn't happen all at once. But as I chose to make that decision to have faith in the promises of God, something began to change. As I began to reflect on why is it that I kept relapsing, there were some pretty big aha moments that God began to reveal about myself. And through a lot of help and a lot of other people, God began this change in me. And I allowed the promises of God to fuel my optimism, and that it became a choice in that moment. Maybe you're sitting here this morning, and I don't, maybe my story might be a little out there for you guys. Some of you might be dealing with the same thing, just different. Maybe it's depression, maybe it's, I don't know. Whatever it is, that sometimes we find ourselves in a place where we need his promises to absolutely fuel the hopelessness in our lives, to allow God to just break through, to allow him to just somehow crack through our minds and our thinking to realize that God is who he says he is. He is all powerful, and that there is hope. Whatever situation we're in, that there is hope, that God can change anything. I realized as I went through that last year that I needed a different view of my life and a different vision of the future, something that would pull me like a magnet, something that would be more motivating, we talked about this last week, than just pain. Because pain's a great motivator, right? But what is more than that is a vision. Something that pulls you forward in your life. Something that gives you something to look forward to. And first and foremost, Jesus is the key to our vision. His words, his ways in our lives, it helps us not get stuck in the middle in mediocrity, realizing that God has something greater for you than what you had and experienced last year. He's got something this year that's even better. And you have to believe that. You have to have the optimism that's fueled by his promises, to believe God, to have faith in him. This is where the Israelites messed up. This is why in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 1, it is such a sad thing. Let me read this real quick. It says this. This is chapter 1, verse 1. They said, these are the words of Moses, spoken to Israel in the wilderness east of the Jordan. Then he names some towns that gives kind of a geographical location of it. And here's the sad thing. It's a parenthetical note in verse 2. It says, by the way, it takes 11 days to go from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by Mount Seir Road. Why is that sad? Because the next verse it says, now in the 40th year, 11 days is all it was going to take for them to get to the promised land. And then he's like, but in the 40th year, right? That wasn't the plan for them to do 40 years, but God will use it. But he gives them this vision. He continues on with them to say, look, okay, we're 40 years later. We're on the east of Jordan. Here's the Holy Land. I'm going to give you the same promise. Now this time, go. Walk in it. See that vision. New Break's vision is this. It's simple. It's developing leaders who change their world. Developing leaders who change their world. We believe this is where God is taking us as a church when it comes to how we empower people. It's to help people change their world, whether your world looks like your home, your workplace, whatever that is. But to develop leaders who change their world, and it's very much in keeping with, a biblical thought that's found in Matthew 28. And by the way, this is this card. I want you to keep looking at this and be thinking prayerfully, what is God speaking to you about your vision for your life? Jesus said this, look, all authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Now, therefore, what? Go. In other words, he's saying, look, I have the authority. I'm giving it to you to go. This is what we talked about last week, agency. We all have agency in our lives. That is the power to change, the power to do something. And he's given that to us, and he says, now go, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded, and surely I'll be with you always to the very, very end of the age. Why is that important? Well, we believe that's the calling of God. Now, we've just reframed it in more modern vernacular. There's nothing holy about the word disciple, by the way. It's not uniquely Christian. Disciple is simply a word that means a disciplined learner. Okay? Jesus actually didn't use the word disciple because he didn't speak English. It was Aramaic and Hebrew, okay? So the intent of that word is simply a disciplined learner, which we think is, leader. Leader is influence. Developing you to be a spiritual leader to change your world. And that's really what they're doing is they went out and taught about the Father and did everything he commanded. They changed the world around them. They revolutionized it. That's why we're here today talking about it. And so for New Break, that's our thought. So how about for you? If you think about all the dimensions in your life, your spiritual dimension of your life, your family, you as a parent, your finances, your vocation, your avocation, your hobbies, and what you like to do. Like all these different areas, your intellectual, your emotional dimensions of your life. What is God calling you to? What is the vision? Can you write it down in one sentence? I want to encourage you to think about that. So it's not only just the vision. We have to align ourselves with that, but then we have to resolve to change with intention. This is about what am I going to do that takes me there. And as we look at the passage in Deuteronomy chapter 30, so as Moses puts the vision out to the children of Israel, to them all in the desert, right? He says, look, here's what I want you to do in response to this, the fact that I'm going to take you into the promised land. And he articulates it this way. Moses says, look, this day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and cursings. In other words, free choice. I'm giving you the option. It's your choice. He says, so now choose life. He's encouraging them. Choose life so that you and your children may live. What he's articulating, that intention, it's an act of our will. It takes us to choose to follow God, to choose to live a life that's better than what it was last year, to not settle in surviving, to not just let the enemy come in and rip us off, but to make a resolute decision. Why is this important? Because you and I never will drift into the life we want. Would you agree with that statement? Like, I don't just all of a sudden I'm at the store with a big crowd and a big line and go, I just happen to have patience right now. It just happened. It just doesn't, I don't just drift into something awesome. It's really hard. I don't all of a sudden drift into areas of discipline in my life. It takes intention. It takes intention to see things through. For example, if you wanted to go back to school and maybe finish your degree, or maybe you wanted to get some training because you're going to go a different direction in a vocation, or you want to get a master's degree or a doctorate degree. You want to improve your education. So you think about this for a minute. So what are all the decisions you have to make just for that one vision that you put into play? Well, where will I go? What degree will I pursue? Does it align with my vision for my life? Will it advance my vocation, or is it an open door to something new? How will I pay for it? How will I take classes, online or in person? Will I quit my job? When do I have time to study? How will I make time for it in my schedule? And do I need to take any prerequisite classes? See, all those questions come into a decision when you make a decision, because it takes intentionality to make it reality. For us to fulfill our vision, it takes intentionality for it to actually become reality. New Break has an intentional mission, and it's the what. What are we doing to help develop leaders who will change their world? And it's this idea of connecting people with God. It's threefold: through authentic relationships to serve communities. Three things we think are the what to grow as a Christ follower, to develop as a spiritual leader who will then go out and actually change their world. There has to be first what? Connection with God. And that takes many shapes and forms and takes time. But we also believe it's done through authentic relationships. For me to change my world, I have to have a relationship with other people. I have to have friendships with people who are not part of the church, who don't know God. I have to develop an authentic relationship. But the huge key that I found the third time going through Teen Challenge is that's a big piece I missed for my own accountability. I wasn't in a life group. I wasn't a part of accountability with other people. I wasn't in a life group where I could know people and be known, to love and be loved, to serve and be served. Instead, I was kind of a lone ranger. So when tough times came, I didn't have a team. I didn't have a tribe. I didn't have a group of people. And then serving communities. It's not just for me internally, but then how do I live that out? How do I serve? Because it's in serving that you come alive. So these are like what we believe helps get you to the vision of being developed as a leader who changes their world. So what does that look like for you? What are the intentional decisions that you need to make this year as you choose life? What is that for you? What are the resolute decisions that you have to make? See, a vision without intention is a dream, and intention without the means, the action, is just a wish list. It's why the last part is that we have to develop the means to change. This is the how. This is the idea of that the means that God has called us to do and how he called Israel to do that. You look at Deuteronomy chapter 6, and it's this classic passage where Moses is telling the people, this is how you do it. Here's the dream, the place I'm taking you. Here's the decision you need to make, and here's how you're going to get there. It's called the Shema. We use it in baby dedications all the time. It means literally to hear. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. And then he pivots and he says, these commandments I give to you today are to be on your hearts. Like they got to be inside of you. You impress them on your children. You talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. In other words, everywhere you go, whether you're at Starbucks or work, like it's a part of your life. This transformation, this idea of following after God spiritually and then incorporating that into your life to the other goals that you have in your life, letting God be a part of all of it. And he says, make it a part of your life. And then he says, tie them as symbols on your hands. What's always in my hand? Oh, a phone. So put it on your wallpaper. I don't know, like put some scriptures or promises of God. Make it like a card on your desk. Keep it in front of you is what he's saying. Write them on your door frames of your house and on your gates. And again, he's saying this is how you get there because you're making it an intentional part of your life where you're doing something. It's action-based, the means. See, the means to change for you and I is simply a way to accomplish what we say that we're going to do. And so we have to commit to doing our part and trusting God to do his part in our lives. It's not about self-help. It's not about I have somehow innate power within me without Christ. It has to be with God. At least for spiritual transformation. That doesn't mean you can't accomplish things without God. People do it all the time. But for me to actually live out the life that God's called me to, the best life that he's called me, his desire, his will, his purposes for my life, it has to be this piece where I trust God, but I do my part. So on this card, as you look at it, think about how you would fill this out if you haven't. Maybe some of you have that statement. Maybe for some of you, you're changing your life stage. So how would you fill this out? What would be your vision, your intention? What would be your means, your VIM, your vigor, your vitality to doing and living out God's best plan for your life? What does that look like? Some of you look at this. I used to do this. I'd look at it like, I have no idea. You're like, it's a blank page staring at me. And I don't want to write something because what if I write the wrong thing? Then I have to cross it out, and I'm OCD, and now I got a crossed out word. All right, chill out. Get another blank piece of paper. But I want to tell you, sometimes I know what it feels like for some of you who've never done this, because I've been there. It feels like chewing gravel. To really do this like in a way that's going to have power in your life, it takes time, process, reflection. And for some of us, it's like chewing gravel. You're like, can't I just live? Well, yeah. But we never drift into a good life. So I want to encourage you to do this. See, change isn't something that God just does to us. It's always something that God does through us in our lives. We're never instantly zapped, like, to change. To become a patient person or to develop godly character or gentleness or self-control doesn't happen overnight. Here's the bummer, Romans 5:8. Here's the bummer. Suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character, hope. I just say it's a bummer because, like, okay, you want to change? All right, let's suffer together. But the compelling vision is supposed to give you excitement. Don't pick a bummer, compelling vision for your life. Pick something that's going to give you excitement, something that's fun, something that's like going to pull you forward on the bummer parts. That's what's critical. Trust me, following Jesus is exciting. And if it's not, it's because you've never been on that edge of faith. And getting on that edge, it's scary, but it's fun. So it means the process, it's cultivating the strategy to live my best life. And here's an interesting piece on this when it comes to that. Intentionality in living out the means, it's important to understand that it's, when you think about willpower, sometimes we're like, I don't have the willpower. Willpower is a limited resource every day. When you wake up in the morning, you have the most willpower in the entire day. You're like full. The day is ahead of you. It's awesome. And you have 100% fully charged willpower. Willpower diminishes throughout the day. And you know how it diminishes? By every decision you have to make. Hey, Dad, what about? Hey, Mom, what about? Or it diminishes when you, take meal prep, for instance. Why is that successful? Because I don't have to make a decision at breakfast, at lunch, at dinner, because it's already been pre-decided and made. Because left to myself, if I didn't do that, what happens at lunch when I'm starving? Yeah, I don't make good decisions. My willpower goes, right? What if I want to get better sleep every night? If I predetermine that every night at this time I'm going to go to bed and wake up, then I don't have to make that decision. I don't have to rely on willpower. Because again, willpower diminishes over time and over decisions that I have to make every day. How about you want to get better at school? You want to get better grades in junior high, high school, right? So you're going to do your homework as soon as you get home. I know, that's a bummer. But think about it. Because then you do it, it's done, it's over with. See, willpower is impacted by our limited resource of it. And our means, our actions help us overcome that. Lisa and I, we have an interesting thing we do every year. We've planned out all of 2019 already. We do this every year. We usually do it at the end of December or first week of January. We literally plan out our entire year. When we're on vacation, when we're gone. Trust me, it's like chewing gravel. It takes quite a while to sit down with a big wall calendar and map it out. But here's what I've learned. If I don't build in the rhythms with my family and my kids and when I'm on vacation and when I'm going to do things and when I'm not going to do things, everybody else will figure it out for me. If I don't put those big markers and rocks in early on, everyone else will have an agenda and a calendar for me. So then now I'm no longer having a vision and an intention and a priority and a means by to get there. I'm just letting something else and everybody else take it up. That is not going to help me live my best life and be able to change the world around me. And so I would encourage you, that's one way to do it, is to really look at your calendar and ask yourself that question, what's on your calendar? To prioritize your times of work, your times of rest, when you're going to be on vacation. It's about cultivating what matters. Lisa and I always say this: if it's not scheduled, it doesn't exist. If it's not scheduled, it doesn't exist. New Break strategy we have, and again, I'm giving you the example of New Break because some of you, like, you don't know where to start with this. You can start with like New Breaks, kind of put some of these pieces into your mind from a spiritual standpoint, but you can change it as you go and think, and as God reveals your own unique vision, intention, and strategy for your life. Ours is simply based around our vision and our mission, what we're going to do, and this is calendar stuff right here. So begin the week in worship requires what? That I'm here on Sunday. Requires you. You guys all get a gold star this morning, by the way, for this first one. You're here. So begin your week in worship. You could expand that. Begin your day in worship. Belong together in life groups. Be the church by serving. Those are all calendar items, by the way. You have to pick when you're going to be in a life group, Tuesday night or whatever, and then go to it. Serving, like I'm going to go, to the Hope Center and serve, or I'm going to serve on a Sunday in children's ministry. These are calendar means by how we get there, because it is about cultivating the habits that produce the change that we want in life. Moses, as he ended his life in Deuteronomy, he talks about his dream and hope for them was that they would love the Lord and they would follow him and hold fast to his ways. That's in chapter 30, verse 20. He talks about how that's his heart for them. You think about Moses' life, and I'm going to end with this. You think about the life of Moses, his family of origin. When he was born, he was abandoned to the river. His parents had to wrap him into a basket and float him down a river because there was a genocide taking place. A legit, for real genocide that Pharaoh had ordered to kill all of the babies in Egypt. So his parents, imagine this, you have a little baby boy, 1 year old, and that's the decree of the land. So you wrap that baby up and you put him in a basket and you're like, okay, God, down the river. Abandoned, genocide. Miraculously, he's picked up out of the water by Pharaoh's daughter, who brings him into the palace and into Pharaoh's home. But as he grows up and gets older, he realizes that the woman that would come every day and that weaned him was actually his mom, his birth mom. And then later, he wouldn't see her as much, but then he knew that his birth parents were slaves to Pharaoh, the home that he lives in abundance, learning all the ways of Egypt, having all of the riches at his disposal, but his parents and his people were in abject poverty and slavery. And as he gets older, it begins to burn within him. And Moses goes out one day and sees an Egyptian mistreating his people, so he murders him. Now Pharaoh finds out. Now he has to flee for his life in exile. And for the next 40 years, he's in the desert as a shepherd, on the back burner, so he thinks. Life is over. I'm on the back burner. He makes the best of it. He gets married and has kids, but he's just out of the picture. Until one day, as he's with his sheep, he looks up on the mountain and he says, that bush looks like it's on fire, but it's not being consumed. I should go check that out. So he goes over and checks it out. Moses. He's like, what? Take off your shoes. This ground's holy. So, sandals. So he does that, and God speaks to him. And God tells him, guess what? I got a job for you. I got a vision for you. Now this vision, you got to go back to Egypt. You're going to tell the Pharaoh, let my people go, and I'm going to do all these crazy, miracles, and all these plagues are going to hit, and then you're going to take them to the promised land. That's all he gives them, by the way. He doesn't tell them about the 40 years wandering in the desert. He just says, this is the plan, so go. So you think about what he had to overcome in his head, in mind. He does all these excuses too, by the way, while he's talking to God, kind of like we do. And so he is obedient. And the rest is history in the book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. He does it. They wander for 40 years. They're on the cusp. He can't go in. God says, yeah, I'm not letting you in, but you get to see it. You've developed a leader named Joshua who's going to take them in. And so he writes the end of this book in Deuteronomy. Whew. You think about everything he had to overcome. Now think about your life. Your struggles. Your questions to God when he says, hey, I have a vision for you. And he speaks that into your heart. And you're like, whoa, hold up. No, blah, blah, I can't. He's like, no, do it. God wants to birth that into your heart today, this week, this year. The vision. And then we apply the intention and the means to it. Pray with me.